Once, long ago, humanity had danced among the stars. Their ships carved through the black like knives. Their colonies bloomed on 1,000 worlds. They were known, they were feared, and most importantly, they were respected. But then came the fall. Not a war, not a disease, but something worse. A slow, creeping decay. They turned inwards, fighting over scraps, forgetting the stars they once ruled. One by one, their colonies went silent. Their homeworld, Earth, became a myth whispered among the stars, a dead rock abandoned by the children who had once loved it. The galaxy moved on without them. Empires rose and fell, treaties were signed, wars were waged. Humanity became a footnote in history, a memory no one bothered to fear anymore. The Iridians, a sleek reptilian race, ruled the central systems now. They saw themselves as the natural leaders of the galaxy, and why not? There was no one left to challenge them. The Grax, massive beasts wrapped in metallic armor, controlled the outer rims, and they too had long forgotten the pale-skinned, fragile creatures who once dared to defy them. In the minds of the powerful, humans were a ghost story, a race too weak to survive, too disorganized to matter. But they were wrong. It started with whispers, a cargo ship gone missing along the trade routes, a secret meeting of planetary governors ending with every delegate dead and no sign of the assassin. Entire pirate fleets wiped out without a single distress call. At first, the galaxy's rulers blamed each other. They thought the Grax were flexing their muscles. Maybe the Iridians were cleaning up the outer sectors. No one wanted to believe the truth. No one dared. On a backwater moon named Sarah 9, an old mining colony barely worth noticing, something different was happening. The miners, mostly a mix of smaller species long oppressed by the big empires, were being armed, trained, organized. At the center of it all was a man. He wore battered armor scavenged from a dozen worlds. His hair was dusted with gray, his face lined and hard. But his eyes burned. A deep, wild fire no other race could quite understand. His name was Captain Caleb Dre, and he was human. When the first Iridian patrol came to Sarah 9 to remind the miners of their place, they didn't even bring heavy weapons. They expected compliance, a few threats, a few public executions, and the problem would go away. They never even had time to scream. Captain Caleb Dre and his handful of rebels ambushed them at the spaceport, dismantling the patrol with brutal precision. Not flashy, not glorious, efficient, quick, human. The news spread fast, first through the mining worlds, then the mid-tier colonies. Whispers of a human uprising, a real one, not the scattered pockets of stubbornness that had always fizzled out. This was something organized. This was something dangerous. The Iridians laughed it off. A few soldiers missing on some dirtball planet? Hardly a threat. The Grax ignored it entirely. Humans were dead, weren't they? The Council of Dominance didn't even bother to meet over it. But Captain Caleb Dre wasn't interested in recognition. He wasn't fighting for headlines. He had a plan, and it was simple. Wake the galaxy up. Remind them who humanity was, and make them wish they had kept fearing humans all along. The next target was bigger, riskier. The weapons depot on Myar's Reach wasn't just a storage facility. It was a symbol. It supplied half the Iridian fleet across the sector. Hitting it wasn't just sabotage. It was war. Captain Caleb Dre stood at the edge of the rocky outcrop overlooking the depot, the cold wind whipping his tattered cloak around his shoulders. Beside him crouched Rhea, a former miner from Sarah 9 with nerves of steel and a hatred for Iridians that burned brighter than the twin suns above them. "You sure about this?" she asked, adjusting the crude rifle in her hands. Caleb Dre didn't answer right away. His gaze was locked on the glittering towers below. The neat rows of weaponized vehicles, the rhythmic patrols of Iridian soldiers, confident in their untouchable supremacy. "We don't have the luxury of being sure," he said finally. "We either strike now, or we die forgotten." Rhea grinned fiercely. "Then let's make sure they remember." The plan was simple because it had to be. They didn't have tanks, they didn't have warships, they had explosives cobbled together from mining charges, outdated rifles, and desperation. But desperation had a funny way of sharpening a blade. As the twin moons rose, Captain Caleb Dre and his small crew descended into the valley, moving like ghosts. They slipped through shadows, disabling cameras, taking out sentries with silent knives and quick, brutal moves. No flashy gunfire, no alarms, just the quiet, growing sense of dread creeping over the depot as the first fires broke out. When the explosives went off, it wasn't a single neat explosion. It was chaos. Towers crumbled, ammunition stores ignited in great roaring balls of fire. The ground shook as entire stockpiles of weapons vaporized in a single glorious instant. The few surviving Iridians tried to mount a defense, but they were disoriented, panicked. They weren't used to being attacked. They weren't used to fear. Caleb Dre watched from the ridge as the depot collapsed in flames, the fire reflecting in his hard, unblinking eyes. "Message sent," Rhea said beside him, panting from the sprint back up the hill. He nodded once. Not the message, the warning. They didn't stay to celebrate. Victory wasn't the goal. Survival was. And as they melted back into the wastelands, carrying what stolen supplies they could, Captain Caleb Dre knew that tonight wasn't the end. It was only the beginning. In the weeks that followed, systems once loyal to the Iridians began to question. Why had the depot fallen? Who had the power, the audacity to strike so deep? Whispers turned into rumors, rumors into fear. And the one word carried by every frightened merchant, every spooked governor, every trembling informant was the same: humans. For the first time in centuries, that word didn't bring laughter. It brought silence. The Iridian High Council convened in secret, their sleek forms gathered around a grand obsidian table. They spoke in hurried, angry tones, too proud to admit what clawed at their minds. Commander Katal, the enforcer of the Mid-Rim, slammed his clawed fist onto the table, cracking the stone. "They're vermin," he snarled. "Scattered rats. I will personally crush this rebellion before it takes root." The Supreme Speaker narrowed his amber eyes. "You would do well not to underestimate rats, Katal. They have a way of gnawing through the strongest walls." For the first time in centuries, the mighty races of the galaxy felt a whisper of something they thought long dead. Not fear, not yet. Unease. And that was exactly what Captain Caleb Dre wanted. Because unease was the crack in the dam. And soon, the flood would come. Captain Caleb Dre didn't waste time. The galaxy was waking up, but not fast enough. Fear had to spread like a fire, outpacing reason before the powers that be could stamp it out. That meant more attacks. Bigger, bolder, louder. Their next move was pure madness, hijacking a Graxian dreadnought. The Grax were monsters in both size and reputation. Standing 3 meters tall with fists like wrecking balls and skin like living steel, they ruled the outer rims with brute force. Their dreadnoughts were more than ships. They were moving fortresses, each one capable of leveling planets. Stealing one? Insanity, which is why it was perfect. The Grax wouldn't see it coming. No one would. The plan began on Baeltor, a forgotten refueling station orbiting a dead star. The Grax dreadnought, Iron Maw, docked there for repairs, its crew relaxed, arrogant, assuming no one would dare approach them. Captain Caleb Dre and his crew blended with the dock workers, wearing stolen uniforms and carrying falsified codes. They moved with the easy gait of the invisible. The people no one noticed, the ones who served but never mattered. Until they struck. It started with the engineering decks, small bombs rigged to critical systems, sabotage masked as mechanical failures. By the time the alarms started blaring, Caleb Dre and his strike team were already deep inside the ship. The corridors were chaos. Grax roaring orders, systems flashing warnings, emergency lights pulsing blood red, exactly as planned. Caleb Dre led his team straight to the bridge, cutting through surprised Grax soldiers with brutal, close-quarters precision. No firefights, no drawn-out battles. Humans had learned. You didn't beat strength with strength. You beat it with speed, with ruthlessness, with a willingness to do what the enemy thought impossible. Rhea took a plasma bolt to the shoulder but kept moving, her teeth gritted in grim defiance. Jax, their wiry tech expert, hacked into the ship's systems on the fly, rerouting controls, locking down blast doors, turning the dreadnought's own defenses against itself. When they reached the command throne, Caleb Dre didn't hesitate. The Graxian captain, a massive brute named Korvath, stood to meet him, snarling in disbelief. "Human?" Korvath spat the word like it was filth. Caleb Dre leveled his weapon calmly. "Surprised?" "You are ants!" Korvath roared, charging. Caleb Dre sidestepped, dodging the first swing that shattered a metal console. He fired point blank, not at Korvath's armored chest, but at his eyes. The plasma bolt seared through the Graxian's skull, dropping the beast mid-charge. Silence fell over the bridge. Caleb Dre holstered his weapon, turning slowly to face the terrified Grax crew, still alive. "This ship belongs to humanity now," he said, his voice cold, measured. "Spread the word." He let them flee. He wanted them to. Within hours, the Iron Maw lit up the comms across the sector, its stolen codes overriding every broadcast system. Captain Caleb Dre's face appeared. Grim, bloodied, alive. "We are the forgotten," he said. "We are the ghosts you laughed at, the ashes you thought scattered. You thought humanity was weak. You thought we were finished. You were wrong. Across 1,000 worlds, across every system and sector, beings of every race stopped what they were doing and listened. And for the first time in living memory, they heard a human voice declaring war. Caleb Dre's final words echoed through the stars. "We remember everything you did to us, and we are coming." Panic rippled through the galaxy. Trade routes were locked down. Armies were scrambled. The Iridians and Grax held emergency councils, blaming each other, pointing fingers. But deep down, they all knew the truth they didn't dare speak aloud. Humanity was back. And this time, they weren't playing by the old rules. The Iron Maw became more than just a stolen ship. It became a symbol, a moving nightmare for the old powers. Every time the dreadnought appeared on sensors, entire fleets scrambled and planets locked down, terrified of what would come next. But Captain Caleb Dre wasn't reckless. He didn't turn the dreadnought into a blunt instrument like the Grax had. He used it with precision, like a scalpel, striking where it would hurt the most. Supply depots, communication arrays, propaganda centers. Every attack was sharp, fast, and devastating, leaving systems in chaos and governments scrambling. In the shattered edges of the mid-rim territories, a legend began to grow. They called him the Revenant, the human who came back from the dead. Meanwhile, the Iridians and the Grax did what they always did when scared. They lashed out blindly. They doubled taxes on the minor species, arrested entire villages suspected of human collaboration, executed workers at the slightest hint of rebellion. In doing so, they made the fires of anger burn even hotter. Captain Caleb Dre understood something the empires had forgotten. Terror doesn't control people forever, not when they have nothing left to lose. Inside the bridge of the Iron Maw, the atmosphere was tense but electric. Rhea sat with her arms still in a sling, glaring at a holographic map displaying the next targets. Jax was bent over a console, muttering to himself as he reprogrammed the dreadnought's stolen navigation systems. Caleb Dre stood at the helm, his arms crossed, surveying it all. "We're gaining momentum," Jax said without looking up. "Got a dozen colonies sending encrypted messages. They want to join us. Some are even offering fleets. Small ones, but still." "And the downside?" Caleb Dre asked, his voice cutting through the low murmur of conversation. Jax hesitated. "The Grax are pissed, real pissed. Word is they've sent the blood pack after us." The room went silent. Even Rhea's confident smirk faded. The blood pack wasn't just another Grax fleet. They were specialists. Brutal, unrelenting, hunters trained to eradicate threats without mercy or hesitation. They didn't capture. They didn't negotiate. They exterminated. Caleb Dre's jaw tightened, but he gave a short nod. "Good. Let them come." Rhea gave a short bark of laughter. "You're insane, old man." "Probably," Caleb Dre said, allowing a rare, thin smile. "But that's what they're afraid of. We'll make it worse." He tapped the screen, marking a new target, the old prison moon of Zareth Prime. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't wealthy. It was forgotten. A dumping ground for political dissidents, rebels, and undesirables from a dozen conquered species. If they freed the prisoners there, it wouldn't just be a military win. It would be a spark, a raging, unstoppable wildfire. 3 days later, the Iron Maw dropped out of warp above Zareth Prime, engines growling low like a beast itching for a fight. The prison's defense systems, ancient and barely functional, tried to activate, but Jax disabled them with a few contemptuous keystrokes. Caleb Dre led the charge himself. They landed hard, boots kicking up the red dust of the prison yards. Alarms blared weakly from broken speakers as Caleb Dre, Rhea, and a small strike team cut through the guards with brutal clinical precision. The prisoners, gaunt, beaten, nearly broken, stared at them in disbelief. A tall, skeletal being with translucent skin stepped forward, eyes wide. You're human," it said, its voice trembling with something between fear and hope. Caleb Dre nodded once. "You want to fight?" A low murmur rose from the prisoners, first uncertainty, then anger, then a roar. Weapons were thrown into desperate hands. Chains were broken. Walls were torn down. By the time they left Zareth Prime, the prison was a smoking ruin, and 1,000 new soldiers followed them into the void, human and alien alike. Caleb Dre stood at the airlock, watching as the planet shrank away behind them. Rhea came to stand beside him, her face serious for once. "This is bigger than us now," she said. "It was always bigger than us," Caleb Dre replied quietly. "We're just the spark." Far off in the distance, sensors flashed. The blood pack had arrived. Massive ships, hulking silhouettes against the stars, bristling with weapons meant to annihilate. Caleb Dre turned to his crew, a fire in his chest that felt almost like joy. "Get ready," he said. Because now, it wasn't just humanity's fight. It was everyone's, and the galaxy was about to find out what happened when you pushed the Forgotten too far. The blood pack didn't waste time. The moment they dropped into orbit around Zareth Prime, they opened fire, hammering the surface with kinetic missiles and plasma bombardments. Dust and fire roared into the sky, blackening the stars above. The Iron Maw shook violently under the first barrage as Caleb Dre and his crew scrambled across the bridge. "Shields down to 60%!" Jax shouted over the alarms. "They're trying to pin us against the moon!" "They want to corner us," Rhea snarled, slamming a fresh power cell into her rifle. "Turn this ship into a tomb." Captain Caleb Dre didn't flinch. His mind raced, cold and sharp. The Blood Pack were bigger, stronger, and more heavily armed. Head on, they didn't stand a chance. Good. They didn't come here to fight fair. "Drop us into the debris field," Caleb Dre ordered. Jax blinked. "You serious? We could tear the hull apart. Better torn apart than blown apart. Do it!" Cursing under his breath, Jax wrestled the helm, forcing the Iron Maw into a steep dive, engines howling in protest. The ship plunged into the thick cloud of wreckage, the broken bones of old satellites, dead ships, shattered defense stations. Chunks of metal slammed into the hull, and the ship groaned like a dying animal. But the Blood Pack didn't follow. Not yet. They hesitated, wary of losing their technological advantage inside the deadly junk cloud. "Now," Caleb Dre growled, "we hunt." Inside the debris field, the Iron Maw became a ghost. Jax killed the main drives, letting the ship drift silently among the wreckage. They powered down weapons, dimmed lights, became part of the graveyard. Meanwhile, Rhea and a hand-picked boarding team suited up. They didn't plan to fight the Blood Pack ship to ship. That would be suicide. They planned to do something much more human. Get inside. Bleed them from within. One by one, stealth pods launched from the Iron Maw, barely detectable against the surrounding debris. The Grax ships, slow and overconfident, didn't even notice until it was too late. Caleb Dre himself led the assault. They breached the outer hulls of the Blood Pack ships with magnetic charges, slipping into the dark corridors beyond. Inside, it was pure chaos. The Grax were used to crushing opposition with overwhelming force. They weren't prepared for the brutal, silent fury of a human boarding party. They weren't ready for the quick knives in the dark, the scavenged explosives hidden inside power cores, the precision strikes against vital systems. It wasn't war, it was slaughter. Caleb Dre moved like a shadow through the enemy ship, carving a path of destruction. He planted charges on reactor cores, sabotaged life support, tore through command decks before the enemy even knew where to shoot. He made them bleed. When the first Blood Pack cruiser exploded from within, the others panicked. They fired blindly into the debris field, hitting each other as much as the wreckage around them. Their discipline shattered, their formation broke, and the Iron Maw struck. Engines roaring back to life, the stolen dreadnought surged out of the debris field, weapons blazing. Torpedoes slammed into the flanks of the remaining ships, ripping open metal like paper. Plasma cannons sliced through armor, punching holes the size of buildings into the enemy cruisers. What was supposed to be a clean extermination became a massacre, but not the one the Grax intended. It was over in less than an hour. The Blood Pack, feared across the galaxy, were annihilated. Their wreckage drifted silently through space, burning and broken. On the bridge of the Iron Maw, the crew sat in stunned silence, panting, bleeding, alive. Caleb Dre leaned heavily against the railing, his chest heaving. Blood dripped from a shallow cut across his temple, but his eyes blazed. "We did it," Rhea breathed, looking around in disbelief. We beat them." Caleb Dre pushed himself upright. His voice was raw but steady. "This was never about beating them," he said. "This was about sending a message." He turned toward the cracked viewport, watching the fires spread across the stars. "Tell the galaxy," he said. "The hunters have become the hunted. Across the fractured colonies, across the enslaved worlds, across every hidden corner where hope had once died. The news spread like wildfire. The Blood Pack was dead, and humanity was alive. Not just alive, rising. The empires, once so certain of their rule, realized something terrible and true. They hadn't just forgotten humanity. They had underestimated them. And that mistake was going to cost them everything. The galaxy didn't know how to react. For centuries, strength had belonged to the Iridians, the Grax, and the few other dominant species who carved up star systems like property deeds. Fear was a tool they wielded as easily as a blade. But now? Now fear had changed sides. News of the Blood Pack's destruction shattered whatever illusion of control the old empires had left. On every world, from the rich core planets to the forgotten mining moons, small acts of rebellion exploded overnight. Worker riots, sabotaged garrisons, entire colonies declaring independence, and everywhere, woven through every desperate transmission, one name kept surfacing: humanity. On the political capital of Vrelas Prime, the Iridian High Council met under full emergency lockdown. The great halls, once glittering with arrogance and pride, now reeked of panic. Supreme Speaker Vikor slammed a clawed hand onto the central table. "We cannot allow this infection to spread." Across from him, Admiral Scythar, once proud, now visibly aged from the stress, bared his fangs. "Half our fleets are tied up putting down revolts. Our colonies are bleeding resources. If we overcommit, the Grax will seize our territories." The words hung heavy in the air. It wasn't just humans anymore. The whole galaxy was teetering, drunk on the first real taste of freedom in generations. And no one, not the Iridians, not the Grax, not the bureaucratic worms that ruled from gilded thrones, had the strength to hold it back. Meanwhile, on the Iron Maw, Captain Caleb Dre stood before a growing army: humans, aliens, former slaves, miners, mercenaries, exiled governors, even deserters from the Iridian fleets, anyone with a grudge and a gun. The docking bay was packed, the air buzzing with raw, electric anger. Caleb Dre didn't give speeches often. He wasn't a politician. He was a reminder. A ghost of humanity's brutal, unstoppable will. He stepped onto a crate, rough and blood-stained, and let his voice carry through the bay. "They forgot about us," he began, his voice low and hard. "They laughed when we fell. They buried us under their laws, their taxes, their boots. They fed on our weakness, thinking it made them strong." He looked out over the crowd, faces bruised, scarred, but burning with the same fire that roared in his own chest. They were wrong. A roar went up, deep and ragged. Caleb Dre raised a fist. "We are not here to beg. We are not here to ask. We are here to take back what they stole." Another shout, louder now. He leaned forward, voice sharp as a blade. "Every broken world, every stolen life, every forgotten name." He let the silence stretch, taut and heavy. "They will remember us, and they will fear us." The bay exploded into a deafening roar. Jax grinned from his post at the side, nudging Rhea. "Told you he'd start a war with words alone?" Rhea only smiled grimly, checking her rifle. "Words are nice. Bullets are better." Outside the Iron Maw, the fleet grew. It wasn't polished or pretty. A patchwork of stolen freighters, retrofitted mining rigs, ancient corvettes held together by hope and duct tape. But it was real. And for the first time in living memory, it flew under a human banner. Not the old polished insignias of the fallen Terran Empire. Something simpler. A tattered black flag. One word painted across it in blood-red letters. Remember. And across the stars, in the secret rooms where cowards plotted and tyrants schemed, the fear they had once wielded like a weapon began to twist against them. Because it's easy to rule the desperate. It's easy to crush the broken. But when you push the forgotten too far, when you treat memory like dust, you don't just lose power, you get dragged into the fire. And Captain Caleb Dre was ready to set the whole galaxy ablaze. The first empire to truly fall wasn't the Grax. It wasn't even the Iridians. It was the vile Syndicate, a slimy cartel that had thrived by selling out weaker species to the highest bidder. They ruled a dozen systems with an iron fist and a network of mercenaries and assassins. Or at least, they used to. Captain Caleb Dre targeted them first for one reason. They had forgotten fear entirely. The Syndicate leaders laughed when news of the human fleet spread. They mocked the rebellion on their secure channels, calling them scraps and ghosts. They bragged that their assassins would cut out Caleb Dre's heart and serve it on a silver plate. They didn't understand. This wasn't rebellion. It was a reckoning. It started with the siege of Talos III, the Syndicate's pride and joy, a fortress world, heavily fortified, surrounded by defense satellites and orbital mines. Caleb Dre didn't order a traditional assault. He didn't have the patience for that kind of slow bleed. Instead, he unleashed terror. The Iron Maw warped in under a sensor shadow, so close to the planet's atmosphere that it rattled from turbulence. Behind it came a fleet of ragged ships, barely space-worthy, patched with stolen parts, painted with defiant slogans in every language imaginable. They didn't follow standard battle formations. They didn't issue warnings. They didn't negotiate. The fleet descended like wolves onto Talos III, blasting through defense grids with ruthless efficiency. Teams of human and alien commandos rained down onto the surface, using retrofitted mining pods to punch through defenses like missiles. The Syndicate's elite guards fought back, of course, but they fought the way privileged men always fought, hiding behind walls, trusting in armor and status. Caleb Dre's people fought differently. They fought like those who had nothing left to lose. They fought like monsters. Rhea led the ground assault, her arms still stiff from old wounds but her aim deadly as ever. She moved through the Syndicate strongholds with merciless precision, leaving a trail of bodies behind her. Jax, meanwhile, hacked into the planet's communication grid, broadcasting Captain Caleb Dre's voice on every frequency. Talos III is falling. Your leaders have abandoned you. Lay down your arms, join us, or be forgotten. It wasn't just a bluff. When the first Syndicate mercenary crews defected, throwing down their weapons, pledging loyalty to the new banner, the tide turned fast. By the third day, the Syndicate's remaining forces barricaded themselves inside their central fortress, a sprawling black citadel carved into the side of a mountain. Caleb Dre stood at the foot of the great gates, surrounded by his growing army. He didn't send emissaries. He didn't offer terms. He simply raised his rifle, aimed at the massive iron doors, and fired the first shot. The final battle for Talos III was ugly, brutal, and short. When it was done, the fortress was a smoking ruin. The Syndicate lords, once fat and powerful, were dragged into the open in chains, their jeweled robes stained with blood and ash. Caleb Dre stood before them, his face expressionless. "You sold your own people for profit," he said. "You forgot what fear was." One of the lords, a bloated creature with 7 eyes and a golden tongue, tried to bluster, tried to offer riches, bribes, information. Caleb Dre shot him between the eyes without a word. The others didn't beg after that. The Veil Syndicate collapsed overnight. Systems once chained by debt and fear rose up, seizing power, throwing off the yoke of slavery, and on every liberated world, the black flag of remember was raised. Not because Caleb Dre demanded it, because the people chose it, because across the galaxy, the message was clear. If you had suffered, if you had been forgotten, if you had been crushed, there was a place for you under the human banner. But it wasn't all victory. Not all battles were bloodless. As Caleb Dre stood in the ruins of the fortress, watching prisoners being loaded onto transports, Rhea approached him quietly. "We lost 2 ships in orbit," she said. "Good people." Caleb Dre didn't flinch. Loss was a given. It soaked into his bones like old scars. "They knew the cost," he said. "And now the galaxy knows ours. Because the dream wasn't peace. It wasn't freedom. It was vengeance, raw and burning, and the empires were starting to realize there was no treaty, no deal, no surrender that would save them. Only the ashes would remain. The galaxy was burning. It started in the outer colonies, then the mid-rim worlds, and now it was racing toward the core like a wildfire through dry grass. Systems that had never known rebellion were toppling overnight. Armies that once crushed uprisings with a flick of a wrist were losing ground to mobs with stolen rifles and makeshift warships. The name Captain Caleb Dre was no longer whispered in fear. It was chanted. It was roared across battlefields and blasted across seized comm towers. On Vrelis Prime, the jewel of the Iridian Empire, the streets boiled with revolt. Statues of long-dead tyrants toppled. Grand halls where treaties had been signed in blood now burned with the fires of justice. Captain Caleb Dre didn't lead every fight. He didn't have to anymore. He had become something bigger than a man. He was a symbol of a truth too terrible for the old empires to accept. Humanity had survived. Humanity had remembered. And now, humanity was teaching the galaxy what it meant to be feared. On board the Iron Maw, Caleb Dre stood alone in the command bay, staring out at the chaos of Vrelis Prime's orbit. The Iridian's fleet, once the terror of the stars, was shattered. Ships drifted like corpses through space, fires eating their hulls, escape pods scattering like insects. Behind him, Rhea approached, armor scorched, helmet tucked under one arm. "We took the High Council chambers," she reported. "It's done." Caleb Dre didn't turn to look at her. "They surrender?" Rhea hesitated. "They begged?" A long, cold silence settled between them. Caleb Dre nodded once. Good. He had no mercy left to give. Jax appeared next, blood on his uniform, a triumphant grin on his face. "We control the broadcast network," he said. "You're live to every system still listening." Caleb Dre turned slowly, the weight of 1,000 dead worlds heavy on his shoulders. He stepped toward the comm station, placed his hands on the console, and leaned in close. When he spoke, his voice was low, steady, and final. "This is Captain Caleb Dre of humanity," he said. "You forgot us. You erased us from your histories. You called us weak, savage, broken." He paused, letting the words sink into every trembling heart across the stars. "You were wrong." Images flashed across every screen in the galaxy: the fall of Talos III, the wreckage of the Blood Pack, the black flag of Remember rising over Vrelis Prime. "We are not your slaves. We are not your footnotes. We are the storm you thought would never come." He leaned back, staring into the endless dark between the stars. "And we are not done." Across the galaxy, planets surrendered before a shot could be fired. Others fought and were ground into dust. Caleb Dre didn't seek out peace talks. He didn't seat himself at diplomatic tables. He left that for others, new leaders rising from the ashes. He had a different task. One last task. The Grax homeworld. The monstrous race that had enslaved billions, had burned human colonies to ash, had laughed the loudest when Earth fell. Caleb Dre would not let them go quietly. The fleet massed around the Iron Maw, a tattered armada stitched from the bones of a dozen fallen empires. Humans, aliens, even former enemies stood side by side, not under a flag of diplomacy, under a flag of vengeance. As they approached Grax Dratha, the once mighty homeworld, the skies filled with enemy ships. The Grax had fortified their world, ready for the final stand. They wanted to make humanity bleed one last time, and Caleb Dre was more than willing to oblige. The final battle was cataclysmic. Starships collided, burned, tore each other apart with brutal savagery. Ground assaults ravaged the surface, cities crumbling under the weight of bombs and boots. The Grax fought like the monsters they were. but they had forgotten one simple truth. Nothing fights harder than the forgotten. Captain Caleb Dre led the charge himself, boots pounding the ruined streets of their capital, rifle flashing fire and death. When the last Grax warlord fell, choking on his own blood, Caleb Dre stood atop the shattered remains of the enemy palace. The black flag was raised behind him, torn and scorched but unbroken. The galaxy watched in silence. They would not forget humanity again, because humanity had returned, not to beg for a place among the stars, not to ask for forgiveness, but to take what was owed in blood, fire, and memory. And Captain Caleb Dre? He simply turned away from the wreckage, his voice low and certain as he spoke to the stars. We were forgotten once. Never again.